Here we go. So the theme of chapter 37 is incredibly fundamental, foundational, not only just to Tanya, but to life. What we know is God created our world. In Hebrew, the word for world is olam. Olam means world, but it comes from the same word as Helen. The same letters spell the word concealment, because the world conceals over godliness. But our job is to take mundane matter of the world, of the concealment, of the tzimtzum, of the diminishment of God's light. And when we actually utilize those objects, items, for the sake of God, of God's purpose, God's will, we're actually elevating all of that, reaching to an even higher place than the way we were before. So we've been going through the different mitzvot, that the action of the mitzvah is higher than anything else that we could accomplish. So more important than the desire, more important than the emotion of how we do the mitzvah, the meditation, the wisdom behind the mitzvah, more important is the action. And really, that's the whole purpose of why we're here. So this is concluding the comfort for the Beinoni, who feels kind of like an afterthought, that the tzaddik really has the ultimate, and the Beinoni is only feeling like a second spare tire, or a second best. What we're saying here is, on the contrary, the whole purpose of all of it is for the sake of your action of the mitzvah. That even the tzaddik needs to do what you're doing. That's the whole point of it all. What you're given the task for is actually the entire purpose of it all. Like we say with every mitzvah, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav, that God sanctified us in His mitzvahs, and He commanded us v'tzivanu so and so. Because when God commands us, it's revealing to us His desires. So God's true desires is the 613 wills that He puts in the Torah. Every time we do that, we're fulfilling His desire. We're connecting with God in a way that could no other way of connection. But it comes through the action base of the mitzvah. And by doing that, we're taking the concealment of the world, and we're actually identifying and uncovering the true oneness of godliness in the world and the true purpose of it all. Okay, so now we'll continue inside. 410, please join me in the book. I will be sharing the Kindle page, and I hope that summary was helpful. You can look back really at the first part of this in the recording of chapter 37. I give a much more comprehensive type of review. Okay, so if you're looking on the Kindle page, we're going to start from all the way at the top. A mitzvah may only be performed with an object which receives its energy from klipas noga, the least potent form of klipa, which is capable of acting as a medium for God's presence to be disclosed. What we discussed and explained last week is that we know there's two types of klipas. One is known as klipas noga, which is the least potent, which has the ability to be elevated. It's neutral. It's either, an apple could either be used to enhance your service and be more patient with your family, or it could just be used to eat as a glutton. Depending on how you eat it, the klipas noga could either be elevated, redeemed to kedusha, or it could be downgraded. But there are also certain things, few things, that don't have the ability to be redeemed. Those are forbidden things. Because they can't be redeemed, God says, don't touch them. Don't use them. There's nothing productive that you could do with them. But everything else, klipas noga, is meant for me and you to redeem, to elevate. So now the Tanya briefly reviews some examples of suitable klipas noga objects from the animal and plant kingdoms, as well as from the non-living matter. So we know that there's four kingdoms that we are working with in the world: the inanimate, the non-living, like a stone and water, I think is the examples I gave last week. Then you have the lowest form of living, which is plant-based vegetables, and that is consumed by the animals, which is the higher kingdom, and that is taken to the highest of them, which is the medaber, the human species. But now we're going to give examples of each of the klipas noga objects from the different types of kingdoms. Klipas noga controls all ritually pure and kosher items, with which the practical mitzvahs may be observed, such as in the animal kingdom, the parchment on which tefillin, a mezuzah, or Torah scroll may be written. As our sages of blessed memory taught, only ritually pure species are fit for the work of heaven, and that which is permissible for your mouth, which means only something that's kosher, permissible to your mouth, is allowed to be made into tefillin, into mezuzah, into Torah scroll, or even into a shofar, right? It has to be from a kosher animal. The same is true in the plant kingdom. For example, you may use an etrog, a citron, for a mitzvah, provided that it is not prohibited by the biblical injunction against arla, which prohibits the first 3 years of fruit from a tree, in which case it would become from the completely impure klipas. So just to summarize this, I think we touched on it last week, and it's just always good to summarize a little bit. In Jewish, in the Torah, there's the concept of arla, which is the first 3 years, of a tree. We don't eat from its fruit. Most trees actually don't really produce much in the first 3 years, but eventually, if it would produce in the first 3 years, we actually don't touch it. It's called arla. It's forbidden for us. Only starting from the 4th year can we benefit from it. So if a person were to use a citron, an etrog, for their mitzvah, but it's taken from an arla, which is forbidden for us, the mitzvah was not fulfilled. But furthermore, what he's saying here, the whole point of a mitzvah is to redeem, to take that simple fruit and to elevate it. But you're not able to elevate something that's coming from the impure klipas. And the same is also with our tefillin. It has to come from a kosher animal. And the same is also, as we'll see other examples that he's going to give from the animal-based kingdom right now. And the point of this all is to say that in order for the mitzvah to be performed, it has to be from a place of klipas noga, which is the neutral type of klipa, the least potent of klipas. And only then could it be elevated. And for example, an example from non-living matter would be money to be given to charity that was not stolen. Because if it was stolen, it would come from the completely impure klipas and be unfit for use as a mitzvah. I think this is pretty obvious, but a person who steals money and gives that money to charity did not fulfill the mitzvah of charity because it's stolen money. Stolen money is klipa. It can't be redeemed. The Tanya now describes what happens spiritually when a mitzvah is performed with a klipas noga object. So till now, we were saying that if it's done with klipa, with impure klipas, you can redeem it. But if it's done with klipas noga, which is a kosher animal to use for tefillin, or neutral money to give to charity, then let's see what happens. And now, when you take one of these klipas noga objects and use them to carry out God's mitzvah, which is his will, what happens is, this is important, the object's energy is elevated. Its sense of separateness is voided, and it's absorbed into the blessed infinite light. So let's just explain that. If you remember, we described the concept of tzimtzum, which is the diminishment of God's light. It feels almost like a separateness between God and between the world. We are our own identity, and then there's God. But when we do a mitzvah, what we're identifying is that the truth in this object is actually godliness. So we're elevating that object to godliness. We're removing the separateness that it may feel, because this is physical and God is spiritual. It creates this perfect synthesis and fusion between heaven and earth, between spiritual and physical, between God and world. Yeah, Robin.
I have a question. Trying to categorize klipa. Okay, a pig as an animal would not be klipa noga, right? Because it cannot be elevated or redeemed.
Right.
And what about another animal that's not kosher, like a cat or a dog or a horse? Is that considered impure klipa?
Yeah, so it's interesting, just the terminology. Impure doesn't necessarily mean it's bad or wrong. It just means that we have no opportunity to elevate that object or that animal to a higher level. So God it's almost like a favor, like it's an interesting concept, but like if you're dating someone, but that person's actually not interested. So you're going out, but there's no future there. So the biggest service they could tell you is, I'm actually not interested. Or you know what, if you have a fundraiser for a nonprofit, for Chabad, but someone is not interested in giving, but the fundraiser thinks they are, the biggest service the donor could say is actually, I don't want to give. You save your time. So over here, what God is giving us in the klipa, he's already identifying what is redeemable and what is not. It's almost saving us time. There's no point in trying to elevate that object or elevate that item. So in other words, yeah, it's klipa, but it doesn't mean that it's inherently bad. It just means that inherently is not redeemable. Did I say that correctly? Yeah. Did that answer your question, Robin?
It does. Thank you.
And just one question is coming up in the comment. So if you are working with a dog to help a blind person, are you not elevating things? You're elevating things, but not the animal never got elevated to now be Kedusha. That animal is not going to be, you elevated the opportunity of the person and the time. What page are we on in the book?
411.
411. Towards the bottom of the page.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
So religiously, should we be limiting our time with animals that are considered klipa?
No, not at all. Animals are the creation of God, and we all, not all of us, but many of us appreciate on this call the relationship between a person and their dog or a cat. They're not kosher animals, which means they're not meant to be eaten, but they're inherently, when we say klipa, it doesn't mean they're bad. On the contrary, they have such good traits. We all know we can learn so much from them. But it just means that when it comes to utilizing it for something holy like Torah, which is a mitzvah, or eating, which is not a mitzvah, but you could use the energy of it, you won't be able to channel the energy of that for the sake of Kedusha, for the sake of holiness, for the sake of writing a Torah. So just to bring it very practical, if a person were to take a non-kosher animal and utilize it to make a talit, the wool, or utilize it to write a Torah, the Torah is not real. It's not a Torah. It has God's name, but it's actually not holy. It's not something that bears any holiness to it, because it's not from a redeemable object. It's not able to be something elevated. Okay.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Sure.
In our Talmud class on Tuesday morning, we're studying, I'm not sure which Breshit, that's the book, but I know nothing else about where we're studying. But what we're studying about is the fact that if you don't begin prayer and have kavanah during the prayer, it's not as good as when you have kavanah and you intend to do the prayer, just not by rote, but with feeling. Prayer is a mitzvah. So it seems that what we're studying now, the mitzvah is not dependent on the attitude of the mitzvah giver, but prayer is.
Wow.
Is that right?
Amazing. So
two different categories.
So when you say prayer isn't, just elaborate on that a little more, that if you don't have the right kavanah when you're doing the prayer is lacking. The prayer is incomplete.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. I would, so you said that's from Tractate Brachot. Does that make sense?
I believe so.
Beautiful. Yeah. So, and in Tanya, it's an incredible parallel that we're going to see, right now in chapter 37, which is concluding a theme from chapter 35. It's all about the action base of the mitzvah. It's the comfort to the Beinoni to know that the entire purpose of why we're here is for the fulfillment of the mitzvah itself, for the transformation of this world to become a home for God through elevating everything and the sparks that's found into Kedusha, into holiness. Next chapter, 38 through 40, is actually giving you the flip side of that coin. Till now, we're talking about the importance of the action. Later, it's going to give you the other perspective, that the action without the kavanah, although you fulfilled it, it's lacking and it's I don't know if the word is incomplete, because maybe prayer, you're right, is different, but you're going to see the other flip side. It's actually a beautiful segue to get from 37 to 38. It's showing you the other side, and in Torah, you always need to see all the perspectives. And that's why we're focusing all about the action. But it's amazing that you brought up this idea of prayer and kavana, because the meditation behind it is what allows the mitzvah to soar up, to fly, and especially by prayer. So the kavana part is going to be a very big theme in 38, 39, 40, and some of them are long chapters, so we're going to have the time to talk about that. But over here is definitely more about the action, but don't feel that we're leaving out the kavana, because that's coming up. Got it? Make sense? And actually, I'm just, as you were saying that, I was turning to see, it's going to be a while till we get there. We probably have another 2 weeks of chapter 37, maybe even longer, until it's a very long chapter. So the Alter Rebbe really wants to hash out the importance of the action and finish this theme, but then we'll switch over to the meditation and the kavanah behind the action. Yeah. Okay, let's go back inside. We're in the middle of the Kindle page towards the bottom of 411, and it goes like this. And the disclosure of the blessed infinite light here is nothing other than God's will, as it is expressed in the mitzvah. So how is God's light coming into this world? It's God's will that's coming through. So it's expressed through the mitzvah. When we do it, we're doing God's will. Since, as we have learned, in the divine will expressed within the mitzvahs, there is no hiding of God's face at all that will conceal his light. So God's expression is totally transparent and complete in the performance of the mitzvah. And not only is the object's energy elevated when a mitzvah is observed, the energizing animal soul found in the limbs of the person observing the mitzvah is also elevated. So by you doing the mitzvah, you're having an effect on the outside, on the object with which you are doing the mitzvah, whether it's with the wool or the hide or the etrog. You're taking it and you're elevating it. If it's a redeemable energy, klipas noga. But now also it's making an effect within the person doing the mitzvah, within the animal soul that's found in the limbs of the person. It's also elevated. Since the animal soul too was immersed in the act, as we have learned in chapter 35, and it's elevated from klipas noga and becomes absorbed in the holiness of the mitzvah, which is God's will. So the animal soul is being elevated to holiness, which is an amazing thing, because it's similar to our discussion, Robin, about an animal that is not bad. The animal soul is also, it's something that could be elevated. So over here, that's what we're doing with animal soul. It becomes absorbed in the holiness of the mitzvah, which is God's will. And the animal soul's sense of separateness is dissolved into the blessed infinite light. And just to explain this idea again, it's a really, if you get the theme of this idea, it's actually very, very powerful. It's going back a few chapters when we were talking about the Shechina, or the flame that is residing above the head of a Jew. What we explained is that we have the oil that is, and we have the wick. The wick is pulling the oil, which is the energy of the mitzvah, through the body that's fulfilling it, the animal soul. And then you have the Shechina residing above us, the flame flickering. What we're saying here, and just to see that complete, that the godly soul doesn't need any rectification. The godly soul is perfect. The godly soul is God. So it doesn't need any aliyah. It doesn't need any ascension or transcendence. The whole purpose was for the sake of the animal soul that is stuck in the mud, that is selfish and wants its own best for itself. But when the animal soul is involved in the mitzvah, the fiber of the animal soul itself is becoming holy. It itself is being elevated, which is the entire purpose of it all, to elevate the animal soul. So when a mitzvah is performed, that animal soul is being uplifted. So not only through the mitzvah are you redeeming the klipas noga around you, whether the etrog or the money, if it's kosher money, or a kosher etrog, but it's also making the effect on the person, on the limbs, on the animal soul, that is the very makeup of the person. It's being elevated also. And that's the whole point of it all, which is what we are discussing now. Which is an amazing point. Okay, let's see the next. So it removes the separateness, the last line we said, it removes the separateness of the animal soul that feels separated from God. Now that's removed. The tzimtzum is uncovered, and the diminishment of light is enhanced. There's no more diminishment. There's the godly light shining strong. Okay, all that was for section 1. So now I told you, Barbara, it's a long chapter, so we'll get through it together. Section 2, Torah study engages the physical world. So far, we have been discussing practical mitzvahs that involve the use of a physical object. But do mitzvahs that are performed verbally, such as prayer and Torah study, come under the umbrella of practical mitzvahs? So, and Barbara, over here, we're not talking about the meditation behind the prayer, I think. We're talking about the actual what's practical of a mitzvah of prayer when it's more in the heart and more in the mind. Do they also make a home for God below, even though they don't directly involve a physical object? So when we're putting on tefillin or lighting Shabbos candles, that makes sense. We're making an effect in the world. But what about a mitzvah that doesn't have any outside effect? It's just a mitzvah in my heart. How does that make anything practical in our relationship with Hashem? So let's see. The Tanya will now argue that even prayer and Torah study do cause the blessed infinite light to be disclosed in physical matter. So, and even the mitzvahs of reading the Shema, which is a mitzvah, and the mitzvah of Torah study and prayer, all those are mitzvahs, while they do not involve a substantive physical action with an object which was previously under the control of Klipas Noga. Nevertheless, there is at least some minimal level of physical activity in the moving of the lips as you recite the words. The Tanya now proves the significance of moving the lips from the point of view of Jewish law. And Barbara, the Tanya now is actually going to quote the tractate Brachot that you were just quoting. So let's see. For we maintain that with mitzvahs performed verbally, meditation does not count as recitation. And you do not fulfill your obligation with these mitzvahs until you make the words come out of your mouth, which is actually in Jewish law. And we maintain that moving the lips constitutes a concrete action. While Torah and prayer may not involve any substantive action, the halachic requirements to verbally articulate the words does constitute a type of action which engages the animal soul. So they are, at some level, practical mitzvahs. So just to summarize this page, it's a really good one, and it'll have a very, very practical effect on you today and tomorrow. There's mitzvahs that we perform with, like giving charity. That is very obvious how it has an effect on something physical. You're taking money and you're elevating it as a mitzvah to holiness. By doing that, you're revealing God's will, God's desire. And by doing that, you're bringing godliness into the world, which is the ultimate purpose. But what about mitzvahs out of the 613 that don't have anything so practical, like money, an object, a physical object that you're donating? Or like tefillin, that is from the leather, the hide of an animal that you're making holiness. So mitzvahs are faith in God. Mitzvahs are prayer, Shema. All those are really in the heart and the mind. So the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe, brings from Jewish law, which is pretty cool because the Alter Rebbe also authored the Code of Jewish Law. Before he authored the Tanya, he authored the Code of Jewish Law. So he quotes from the Shulchan Aruch, from the Code of Jewish Law, that in order for your prayer, for the Shema to count, you actually can't just meditate on it. If you just meditate on the Shema, the mitzvah was not fulfilled. The mitzvah is to actually recite the words. Your lips have to move in order for it to count. If you meditate on it, it doesn't count. So just continuing this a little further, when I say the Shema in the morning, it's actually a mitzvah to say the Shema in the morning, in the first 3 hours of the day, and in the evening after dark. So when we say the Shema, at least the very first line, it has to be said with reciting it with my lips, but also meditating and understanding what it's about. But if you don't recite it, the mitzvah was not fulfilled. The same is also with reciting any of the written Torah. When you study the written Torah, in order for it to work, you have to actually recite the words, and your lips have to move. The same is with prayer. For prayer to count, your lips move. So you could think about how you pray, but when you pray from a siddur, your lips are actually reciting the words, and your lips have to move in order for it to count. So what the Alter Rebbe is trying to prove from that is we see that even more meditative mitzvahs that don't have anything substantive in the actual world, but we do have the importance of reciting with the lips to bring it out in an action style. So it is action based now that you're moving your lips. And I think I quoted this either last week or the week before, that that's also part of the reason of why we shuckle, I think Yaakov, we were talking about this, why we move a little bit. Sway is also to bring it out in a practical, physical way. So that's not as important. That's not in Jewish law. The main thing is actually moving your lips, and that itself is the action base. Do we need to move our lips when reading the Halftorah for it is counted as a mitzvah? No, I don't think for the Halftorah. I don't know. I'm not sure.
I got a question.
Yeah, let me just answer Mrs. Berger's question and make sure I get it. I don't know if it's a mitzvah to read the Halftorah. We do a blessing on it, but it's a mitzvah for the reader to read it, meaning, in synagogue, when there's a Torah reader, he reads it for all of us. And we all say the blessing amen before and after, the blessing before and after. So we are represented by the reader. So the same as with the Halftorah, as long as the reader at the bima is reciting the Halftorah, and of course he's reciting it loud, so he's moving his lips, you get your mitzvah for that as well. Yeah, yes, Yaakov.
I got a question about prayer, because one thing that I've noticed before is that I see a lot of people when they're praying, they've memorized the words so much that they can like look around to see whatever when they're praying, right? I get the feeling, I know for me, I have to concentrate on what I'm reading to actually do it. So does it count for people that are like just rushing through it to get on with their day, or what?
Yeah, awesome. Great.
Yeah. I always wondered about that too.
And I have one other question. See, I'm not proficient.
Let me just answer this one first. Let me just answer this one, and then we'll just so that because everyone's thinking of your question now, it's a very good one. So first of all, that's actually the reason why people that are coming back into the fold, are working on their observance, on their prayer, actually have a one-up. They have a certain advantage over the person that grew up with it their whole life, because their focus is needed much more. Someone who could say the prayer is backwards, it takes actually more effort for them to make sure they understand what they're saying, because it's so easy for them to have their mind wander elsewhere because they know that they're saying it by rote. There's actually many letters in the Tanya. After this main section of the Tanya, which is the first 53 chapters, which we're already studying for a few years, and it's going to go for another few years in good health, God willing. After that, there's compilations of the Alter Rebbe's letters that he wrote to different Jewish communities. And there's two big themes. One of them is about the importance of giving charity. The other is about the importance of praying and being focused in your prayer. The Alter Rebbe actually, he sent spies to check the synagogues that were under his guidance in different cities to make sure that they were praying properly. It's a very important part of Hasidic life that the prayer should be meaningful. The prayer should be serious. I just watched this beautiful video of the Rebbe. It's interviews where people were complaining to the Rebbe that they were not focused in prayer. And they were asking the Rebbe guidance of how to make sure their focus remains present in the prayer, because they knew it by heart, like you're saying, Yaakov. And one of the interviewers, he says that I told the Rebbe that he had a business, he would travel to China. So he says, sometimes I'm in New York, but I actually find myself in China because his mind is already thinking about his business. So the Rebbe actually, you see the instructions the Rebbe gives the different people of how to make sure you're focused. Number one, the Rebbe says, you have to look inside and point into the place. I found that to be a very beautiful, for people that are not familiar with the words by heart, you're obviously doing that. But for someone who knows it by heart, it's very easy to just do it in your like very quickly. So the idea of pointing to the place will keep you focused. Anyway, I could talk about more since it's not a prayer class fully. I don't want to get too much more into it, but go ahead. What's your other question, Yaakov?
Well, my other question is, like, people like me, I'm not proficient in Hebrew. And so oftentimes when I'm reading it, I don't know what I'm saying, right? To have more meaning, wouldn't it be better for us to read it in a language that we understand, like in English?
Yeah, so absolutely. So there's two parts to that. Number one, and I'll just answer it quickly. Number one, yes, God understands all languages, and it's important that you understand what you're saying so your prayer is meaningful. But number two, there's a certain recipe in the Hebrew words that, because it was authored by the Sanhedrin, by the Supreme Court, by people like Mordechai, right, the leader of the Jews during the time of Purim. He was part of the members of the Great Assembly. They had the perfect recipe in the ingredients to have the right words to reach a certain, to have the potency and strength to reach a certain chamber that we need to reach. So, for example, in one of the blessings in the Amidah is the blessing of healing. There's 27 words in that blessing in Hebrew. There's a specific reason why it has 27 words, because it's reaching a certain category, a certain level, a certain world. And it's symbolized in 27. So when you're saying it in English, I don't know, I didn't count that many words, but it's not 27 words. But of course, it's more important to understand what you're saying, so say it in English. But at the same time, work on trying to take 10 minutes once a week to try to take a section of prayer that you could work on it to understand it in Hebrew and also understand its meaning. So what I did as a young teenager, to understand, it's a very important thing. It's called Pirush Hamilot, to understand the words. Now in schools, they actually, there's a class, one of the classes in school is understanding the words of prayer. But anyway, but for me and you that are beyond that school age, it's still important to once a week sit down with a Hebrew and English sitter, or you could do it online. It's linear, so it's pretty easy to follow. And take one word, write down what it means, take the next word, and in your siddur, you write down. So you can read it in the Hebrew, but at the same time, you'll know what it means. And if you do it once a week on one paragraph or one page or one prayer, over the course of a year, you'll actually be better, in the Hebrew of it, and you'll also understand the meaning of it. So it's just a little bit. So the answer to your question is yes, pray in English, but at the same time, don't satisfy yourself with that. Try to also understand the Hebrew, because ultimately there's a reason of why the prayers were made in Hebrew. Okay, we will continue. I hope that answers your question, Yaakov.
It did. Thank you.
Awesome. We're towards the third of the way down on the Kindle. For it's impossible for the divine soul to express itself through verbal articulation via the physical lips, mouth, tongue, and teeth, unless the divine soul acts through the medium of the energizing animal soul. Because unlike the divine soul, which cannot interact directly with the body, the animal soul interacts with the body's limbs tangibly. The idea is not purely theoretical. It also has the following practical ramification. The louder you speak, the more you enter and immerse your energizing animal soul into those words. Practically speaking, when you study Torah and pray more energetically, saying the words with more gusto, your animal soul absorbs the blessed infinite light to a greater extent because it is more involved in the mitzvah. I love this idea where the more involved you are in the mitzvah, the more gusto, I like that word, that you put into saying the words, the more your animal soul feels it, and the more it's interacting with the body's limbs, and the divine soul is affected through that. You're elevating it, which is an amazing concept. For some, what that could mean is the idea that you pray in a place that has a nice chazan, because when the chazan, the cantor, is singing beautifully, it enwraps you. It captures you to reach a certain level. But over here, the Alter Rebbe is not saying about the chazan. It's saying about you praying with more energy. It's about your prayer. It's not about watching someone else do it. It's about the experience and the words that you are articulating and reciting. The Tanya now cites scriptural and Talmudic support for the idea of energetic involvement of the body in prayer and study. So now we'll bring sources, and the need to involve the body in prayer is implied by the verse, all my bones will exclaim, who is like you? In Jewish legal texts, this verse is cited as a source for involving the body in swaying movements during prayer, right? The shackle that we spoke about. Because it says, all my bones will exclaim. So it's not just in the heart, it's not just in the mind, it's my entire body, my bones will also declare that. So we see the energy of the body affects the level of our intent. And this is also stressed by the teaching of our sages of blessed memory, which refers to the importance of studying Torah aloud. Beruria was the wife of Reb Meir. And for those in Adina's Torah and Tea, like last year, I think Adina gave a class on Beruria. Does that sound familiar? Beruria came across a disciple who was learning his traditions in a whisper. She rebuked him, saying to him, "Isn't this written, ordered in all things and retained?" So that's from Samuel. I just want to get the Hebrew words of that. Isn't it written, ordered in all things and retained? If it is ordered in those 248 limbs of yours, it will be retained. And if not, it won't be retained. So the verse is a little bit of a cryptic one where it says, ordered in all things and retained. When will it be retained? If it has the order in all limbs of your body. You know, there's 248 limbs of the body. If the study is in capturing all of your limbs, then it's going to be retained. And by the way, we all know this, and you see this so clearly. When you study Torah and you study with your eyes, it's not as solidified as when you study with your lips. When you say the words out loud, it's called a kol Torah, the voice, the sound of Torah, or the sound of prayer. It has a bigger effect. It inspires us more. Are women supposed to? I think so. Why not? I don't know. Yeah. I'm not on the women's side, so I haven't seen the women do it. But Mrs. Berger, it means that you're peeking on the men's side. I'm kidding. Okay, I think so. I think you're supposed to shuckle if that was your question. But I find this to be a very practical way that when you pray with your voice and with your lips moving and with the sway, it actually affects your energy and the experience of the prayer. The message here. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Is that why? Excuse me. Is that why scribes, when they're writing the Torah out, that they say each word as they go along?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know if that's the reason. I didn't know that they do say the words with them. It's interesting. I didn't know that. Yes, Robin.
I just have a thought. It's neither here nor there. We know so much more about our bodies in neuroscience than when the Tanya was published in 1799. And we know that when we engage in an activity, there's all sorts of neurological activity going on in our brains. You know, neurons are firing, patterns are created. And when we're really thinking hard or feeling hard, deeply about things, maybe those patterns are deeper, the lights flashing are brighter.
Oh, you got muted. Yeah.
So there's activity happening within our bodies that show the level of our involvement without even moving our lips.
Mm-hmm.
For people, I guess, who can't move their lips, I'm thinking, there's still some kind of activity that shows the strength, of our kavanah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I would identify with that. And also, what just came to mind is we all know that if a person has a struggle in their heart, if you want clarity over it, the best thing is to speak it over to a friend.
Mm.
Because first of all, the friend is there to support you, but also just the idea of speaking it out actually gives you more clarity, and that idea of it finding its sense of what decision you need to make. So
talking out loud, you're right. You just made me think of something. When I was in 7th grade, and I remember we were learning my first Shakespeare.
Oh, wow.
I guess it was Hamlet or Julius Caesar, one of those two, in 7th grade. And I remember I had such a hard time, even though I'm a big reader, I had a hard time understanding that kind of English, but I sort of caught on to the idea of reading it out loud.
Nice.
And it all came clear.
Yeah. So that's actually the way we're supposed to study Torah, is the same, by reading it out loud, even if you're studying yourself. The message here is that your Torah will be retained and remembered if your body's engaged when studying it. For the tendency of forgetfulness is rooted in the klipa of the body and energizing animal soul. That's amazing. Where does forgetfulness come from? It comes from klipa. If the cause of the forgetfulness, klipa, can be eliminated through energetic involvement, Torah is more likely to be retained and remembered, because forgetfulness is coming from klipa. When you are reciting the words, which means you're diminishing, you're eliminating that klipa because of your energy involvement, because of the action that you're doing, which is eliminating the klipa. Forgetfulness is not there anymore. Torah will be retained. That's a really cool way of understanding that. And since the body and animal soul are from klipas noga, which are capable of being elevated and absorbed into holiness, the tendency to forgetfulness can be averted. And that is when their powers are withdrawn from non-sacred pursuits and fully immersed into the sacred practice of Torah study or prayer through involving the body and animal soul as much as possible through verbalization and bodily involvement. Awesome. So when we involve our body, we verbalize the words of prayer. That is a way of how our study of Torah, our prayer, our Shema recital, etc., is also involving our body and therefore animal soul, and elevating them to Kedusha, holiness. Section 3, elevating your foot to God. In addition to the primary involvement of A, the body, and B, the animal soul in a mitzvah act, we will now turn to the secondary involvement of the physical energy that powers them. So we have the involvement of the body and the animal soul in the mitzvah, but now the third thing we're going to be covering now is the energy that is involving, powering the body to involve itself. So let's see what that is. And yet another point is that the energizing animal soul's power invested in the spoken words of Torah study or prayer, etc., or in a practical commandment, has been completely nourished and sustained by the blood, which is from klipas noga itself. This nourishment of the blood being from all the food and drink that you ate and drink, which entered your blood and came under its ruling spiritual force of klipas noga and became its source of nourishment. So when you eat, when you drink, you're that's entering your bloodstream, right? It's coming part of who you are, and it's part of klipas noga. So when you now are involved in a study of prayer, utilizing that energy, so you're taking the energy that is allowing you to fulfill the mitzvah and elevating that as well. So it's not just the body and the animal soul being elevated, it's the energy that's where it's coming from, because it's part of your body. So let's just see that inside. The food and drink that gave you energy are an important participant in the mitzvah. Since that energy was from the powers of klipas noga through the blood, it follows that when you do a mitzvah, you elevate that food or klipas noga energy too, as the Tanya will now explain. And now that you use this food energy in your blood to do a mitzvah, it's transformed from negative klipas noga to good and is absorbed into the powers of holiness through the power of the energizing animal soul that made your body move to do the mitzvah. Since that power of your animal soul was nourished by the food in your blood, and then that power of your animal soul, nourished by the food in your blood, immersed itself into those words of Torah, study, or prayer, or into that mitzvah act. That mitzvah being the actual inner will of God, devoid of any hiding of God's face. And as a result, the energy from the food in your blood, which powered the animal soul to do the mitzvah, became absorbed in the blessed infinite light, which is in the mitzvah, since the mitzvah is the will of God. So I know this was a long paragraph, just to summarize it. So we're working on elevating all players in the mitzvah observance. So the godly soul, we already said, doesn't need elevation because it's already holy. But the whole purpose is for it to be involved in the physical world. When you are involved in the physical world, we have the object that is involved in being elevated. But even if it's a mitzvah that doesn't involve a physical object like prayer or Torah study, you involve a verbal or your body is involved, and that's considered the action. And when you do that, you're involving your body, elevating your body, the animal soul, but also the energy with which your body functions. So when you eat and drink, and the energy of that is now being used for a mitzvah, that's an important participant. That's being elevated and to the inner will of God. So I know the reason why I went a little fast is we've been covering this concept, this theme throughout the chapter. And along with the energy from the food and the blood, which is elevated through the mitzvah, the power of the energizing animal soul, which was used to carry out the mitzvah, is also elevated and absorbed into the blessed infinite light. I'm just going to read
Rabbi, why is it that not everything, but often in the Torah and in the prayers, it's repeated and repeated and repeated 50 times throughout a service, throughout this book? Is that because we forget so quickly that we need to have that many repetitions?
You're saying in prayer or over here?
Both.
Well, over here, it's actually not repeating itself many times. It's actually me just giving you summarize. I'm summarizing. That's just my style. I'm giving.
No, I understand that, but
so let me just finish this. Okay, so let me just answer your question about prayer. I actually saw a beautiful answer of why we have repetitions. I explained this on Yom Kippur, because on Yom Kippur we actually have a lot of repetitions. For example, the Al Chet, the prayer of forgiveness, asking God to forgive us. We actually repeat it 10 times over 24 hours of Yom Kippur, the Al Chet, in the 5 prayers, but then again in the repetition of the prayer of the Amidah. So we actually say it 10 times Al Chet, which is when we tap on our chest. If you're familiar with that part. So the obvious question is why do we repeat it so many times? If anything, we tell our children, and I just told my kid last night, that I'm telling you this once and only once, so listen well. So if our children are expected to listen on the first time, you would expect God is listening the first time. He's not forgetting. He doesn't need to hear it again. So the beautiful explanation I heard from Rabbi Aaron Moss, who's a colleague of mine in Sydney, Australia. Oh, yeah. He gives the analogy of Beryl and Yankel. And if I've explained this already during this Tanya class, I could stop. But Beryl and Yankel, Beryl owed Yankel $10,000. And Yankel sees him on the street and says, Beryl, you never paid me my money back. Where's my money? And Beryl says, things have been very hard. The economy has been bad. My business has been sinking. I need more time. But in truth, now, Yankel, that I see you, I wanted to ask you if you would consider forgiving the loan. So Yankel is so upset. Are you crazy? You're asking me to just forgive the loan? I can't forgive $10,000. So Beryl says, no, I'm not asking you to forgive it all at once. I'm asking you to forgive it in installments. This month, I'm asking you to forgive $1,000. Next month, I'm asking you to forgive another $1,000. But before the year is up, all 10,000 will be forgiven. So the reason why I share that as an analogy is because if you do things enough, you actually gain the more of an understanding of what you're trying to do. You refine yourself in the process. So I don't think Yankel would appreciate having to forgive a $10,000 loan in installments. When we are praying and doing it in installments, which means we pray it, but now we're elevating ourselves. So when we pray the next Amidah, we're actually supposed to be on a higher level based on the kavanah, based on the understanding of the previous Amidah. It actually is supposed to elevate us, refine us. So when we reach the next stage of prayer, even if it's the same words, it's a different experience because you're elevating yourself.
Rabbi Landa?
Yeah.
When we say that we are elevating the animal soul by doing a mitzvah, I have put this in the chat box. Does that mean only the only part of the animal soul we can elevate is the klipa noga, right?
Yeah, but that's the whole animal soul. There's nothing inherently bad in the animal soul. The animal soul is given to us by God, and it could be elevated. There's nothing. The animal soul could lead you to forbidden things. because it has temptations. But all the temptations itself is not a bad thing. It leads you to bad things. But the temptations could just be channeled to temptations of holiness. So the animal soul is good. You just want to elevate it to a place of holiness. So that's
I'm sorry. So when we say the animal soul, we're only talking about Klippus Noga. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, thank you.
Nothing forbidden in the animal soul, exactly. Meaning not what it leads to, exactly. So just back to this prayer. So the repetition is more needed for us more than it's needed for God. In other words, it refines us more. But it's interesting because Torah, it never actually repeats anything. The Torah, it says it once and it's expecting you to know. That's both in the written law and the Talmud also. The Talmud doesn't repeat things. Neither does Jewish law repeat things. It's all once. But in order for us to grasp it, we need to repeat it. That's across the board. Actually, I have a Talmud on my desk over here. I'll just show you. Every page of Talmud, this is what a page of Talmud looks like. Every page of Talmud has the main text, which is in the middle, but every page of Talmud has 4 lines at the top, which is just a commentary of Rashi. But the way the format of every page of Talmud is set is that the actual text of Talmud only starts 4 lines down. The top is always going to be a commentary, Rashi or Tosfot. It's not important for now. I'm not giving you a Talmud class, but every page of Talmud has the same format because it's to remind us that if you want to actually retain this page of Talmud, you actually have to review it 4 times. Everything has to be reviewed. So the way I give my class, I usually review things often. It's good for me, and I hope it's good for everyone. So it's not actually the Tanya itself is not repeating. It's me just reviewing, repeating, but over here it's actually saying something not the same that it said a page before. Right before it's talking about elevating the animal soul, elevating the body, and now it's talking about elevating the energy with which our body is energized from, which is the food and the drink, the energy of the body. So it's actually saying something else. I'm just going to read a few practical lessons, and I'll take the questions that are left. This is on 413, which I didn't get to. Even when you study Torah and pray, you make your body a temple for the divine by saying the words out loud and involving your body energetically. And finally, what we just learned now, another practical lesson, a mitzvah elevates A, your body, B, your animal soul, and C, the food in your blood, which powers the act. Okay. Repetition is necessary for memory. Sign says rose is a rose, is a rose, is a rose. Awesome. So that's repetition is needed for us. And by the way, I'll just add one more part to that. One of the biggest parts of actually retaining information, and more important is applying the information, is actually when you're not just reviewing it. Reviewing is when you have the book open and you read it over. Applying it is when you actually close the book and you think about it. What you're able to do in that 3 minutes of thinking over what we've studied will remain with you a lot longer and a lot stronger. It's the application of it. So actually, before we start praying, for those that were asking about the meditation and prayer, part of the greatest meditation of prayer is actually before beginning to pray, you meditate for a few minutes. And then your prayer will be different. Moving your lips and shuckling, but the fervor of the energy of your prayer will be different based on the meditation. That's why ideally the way it's set up in yeshivas is actually we don't begin the day with prayer, which is the common thing is you begin your day with prayer and then you go on to business, etc. The way in yeshivas for yeshiva boys, they actually begin with study, chassidus like Tanya, and only after studying for an hour do they begin prayer. And they actually give a time in between the study and the prayer so you could think about what you studied and apply it in your prayer. The way that was set up by the Rebbes is the yeshiva studies from 7:30 to 8:30 or depending on their age, sometimes until 9 o'clock. But then prayer only starts at 9:30. They give you a half an hour to prepare yourself for prayer by thinking over what you just studied. And like they say, a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. When you study and you think about it, the thinking is worth more than 1,000 pages. Oops, let me just go back to the chat. I'm just going to go up in case I missed, and then I'll see. So reading things silently does not perform the mitzvah adequately. You need to move your mouth to perform physical action. Correct? Yep. Awesome. Do we need to move our lips when reading the Halftorah? Answer that. Are women supposed to sway? I think so. So talking about Yitzi Horowitz, who has limited movement, he may not be able to move his lips, but he can move his eyes. So of course, for him, that's definitely what Hashem wants from him. But for all of us, it should be moving our lips. Repetition is necessary. Why do we repeat things? Why 4 times? I'm not sure. I don't know the science behind it. When we are saying our prayer out loud, it becomes difficult to concentrate when all are speaking out loud. How do we concentrate when this happens? That's a great question, Freda. Does anyone have an answer to Freda's question? And I think, Barbara, I discussed this with Howard in the past. When I'm trying to focus, but there's other people around me praying out loud, it kind of distracts my focus. How would you respond to that?
Rabbi Rice is great about talking about when people talk in shul, and he talks about it almost every week. And the idea is that everyone is a mirror, that this is my words. You only see yourself when you look at someone else. And the fact that they're talking really should not make you upset. They're in shul. They're in shul.
But what about if they're not talking about sports or politics? They're talking prayer. They're actually...
Well, I see. I look at the Chabad way of davening, where everybody is talking out loud and saying the words, and it's a mumble jumble in the background. To me, that's better than white noise. That's really gets me in the mood.
Beautiful.
To daven.
I like
that. Kavanah.
And Freda, so just along the lines that Barbara is saying is that when people are praying out loud around you, you should join them in praying out loud, and then it doesn't distract your focus. Like Barbara's saying, it'll actually enhance your focus. Like it's part of that experience that you're joining in. I like that. Thank you, Barbara. And I think one more question just came in. Toda. Awesome. All right, everyone. Sorry for the delay and the overtime today. I hope you had a great time and have a great Wednesday.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're
Bye,
welcome.
everyone.
Bye.